On the evening of July 4th, 2026, Typhoon No. 1, internationally designated as Typhoon Maysak, officially crossed the coastal threshold of northern Vietnam, making direct landfall over Mong Cai City, Quang Ninh Province. The National Center for Hydro-Meteorological Forecasting confirmed that the eye of the storm breached the coast at approximately 7:30 p.m. on July 4th, 2026. At the time of its catastrophic transition onto land, the system maintained sustained wind velocities corresponding to levels 8 and 9 on the Beaufort scale, ranging between 62 to 88 kilometers per hour. More dangerously, convective cloud bands wrapping around the eye triggered violent, localized gusts that peaked at level 11. The defining characteristic of Typhoon No. 1's landfall was its exceptionally low forward translational speed. Upon colliding with the terrain of Mong Cai and the northern border region, the storm system slowed to a crawl, moving at a mere 5 to 10 kilometers per hour. Meteorologists observed that during the midnight hours spanning July 4th and the early morning of July 5th, the typhoon became nearly stationary, standing still, directly over the urban core and coastal sectors of Mong Cai. This prolonged stalling meant that infrastructure was subjected to intense, unbroken wind battering and torrential precipitation for over 8 consecutive hours. The massive cloud system associated with the southern flank of the typhoon's circulation unleashed immense atmospheric moisture over Mong Cái City and adjacent border districts. Rain gauges across the municipality recorded concentrated short-duration downpours exceeding 200 millimeters, with certain isolated coastal monitoring stations tracking cumulative volumes approaching 300 to 450 millimeters. Sudden influx of water immediately overtaxed municipal drainage systems, triggering extensive urban inundation and severe hydrological surges along regional river networks. The path of the storm directly intersected the main urban, economic, and maritime subsectors of Mong Cái City. Field assessments indicate that the destructive impact was concentrated across several critical border zones. In Mong Cai, encountered severe sustained winds, widespread urban tree structural failure, and immediate localized grid failures. Experienced extensive localized residential roofing damage, infrastructure loss along primary avenues, and critical maritime emergencies within its sheltered anchorages. Subjected to direct storm surge vectors, coastal flooding, and high-intensity rainfall that overwhelmed agricultural and low-lying residential sectors. Sustained the highest financial toll regarding aquaculture infrastructure, open-air agricultural canopies, and coastal economic activities. Following preliminary field surveys conducted on the morning of July 5th, 2026, by the Mong Cái City Steering Committee for Natural Disaster Prevention, Search and Rescue, and Civil Defense, the documented damage footprint is outlined across 5 core categories. The sustained pressure of level 11 gusts ripped apart temporary and semi-permanent structures throughout the city. More than 30 residential houses suffered total or near-total roof stripping. The violent upward aerodynamic draft sheared corrugated iron sheets from their structural mountings, scattering sharp metallic debris across urban corridors. The commercial zone immediately surrounding the Mong Cai International Border Gate suffered extensive superficial and structural damage. Dozens of large-scale advertising signboards, outdoor display fixtures, and heavy steel-framed shop canopies were buckled, twisted, or entirely detached from storefronts. The perimeter fencing and structural security barriers at the Mui and Ngọc border guard control post were partially compromised after being crushed by falling debris and subjected to continuous wind vectors. The environmental aesthetics and urban forestry canopy of Mong Cái City sustained an unprecedented blow due to the prolonged duration of the storm. Hundreds of urban shade trees, including decades-old species lining central boulevards, were entirely uprooted, snapped at the trunk, or structurally shattered. Fallen trunks and large severed branches formed massive physical blockages along primary transportation paths, rendering lanes impassable to emergency vehicles and effectively isolating several residential neighborhoods throughout the night. Multiple parked private passenger vehicles were crushed or pinned beneath the weight of collapsed trunks, resulting in severe vehicular body damage. High winds paired with flying debris heavily compromised the localized medium and low-voltage electrical distribution networks. Multiple concrete power utility poles and municipal street lighting standards snapped or bent under the weight of falling trees and extreme wind cross-sections. The physical disruption of lines and the automatic activation of substation safety trip systems plunged several wards into total blackouts starting from the evening of July 4th. Power remained down through the night, hindering initial communications and visibility during the peak of the emergency. The slow-moving nature of Typhoon No. 1 generated continuous high-energy waves and localized storm surges along the coastal fringe, dealing a heavy blow to the local seafood industry. Numerous aquaculture rafts, particularly those engineered for high-density oyster and shrimp cultivation in the shallow coastal waters off Haihua and adjacent sectors, were ripped from their anchoring grids. The waves smashed wooden frames and tore plastic netting, releasing valuable stock into the open sea. In the marine area of Mong Cai, the fierce combination of rising tides and wind sheared the heavy mooring lines of two large vessels. Uncrewed and out of control, these ships began drifting dangerously through the navigation channels, presenting an immediate collision hazard to other anchored vessels and coastal infrastructure. The massive precipitation footprint triggered an instantaneous hydrological response in local river systems. Rainwater draining from the surrounding hills caused a rapid, violent rise in the water level of the Ka Long River. By the early hours of July 5th, the river breached its normal banks, sending a thick torrent of muddy water and silt directly onto the riverside pedestrian walkways and low-lying plazas. In lower elevation residential pockets and poorly drained intersections, waters rose up to 0.5 meters, flooding ground floor storefronts and stalling out localized transit. In response to the escalating threat, the Mong Cái City People's Committee deployed an extensive defense and rescue operation, adhering strictly to the national four-on-the-spot principle. Local leadership, local forces, local materials, and local logistics. A combined force of hundreds of personnel was deployed into the field to maintain public safety, manage evacuations, and conduct midnight search and rescue operations. Officers and soldiers from the local border guard stations, alongside regional military commands, led frontline rescues. Traffic police units braved the extreme level 11 winds and blinding downpours throughout the night of July 4th to redirect vehicles away from flooded hotspots and establish safety cordons around downed high-voltage lines. The most critical emergency occurred when the two unmoored vessels began drifting wildly through the storm-tossed waters. Upon receiving urgent telemetry from maritime observers, the local authorities immediately assembled a specialized emergency rescue team. Operating under zero visibility conditions, heavy swells, and dangerous gusts, rescue craft successfully intercepted both runaway vessels. Responders boarded the drifting platforms, deployed secondary emergency anchors, and lashed them securely to heavy structural moorings, successfully preventing a major maritime disaster. Hours before the eye of Typhoon No. 1 arrived, civil defense teams conducted door-to-door sweeps of vulnerable coastal shanties, aquaculture huts, and homes with structurally weak roofs. Dozens of families were forcibly yet safely relocated to reinforced public administrative buildings, schools, and military barracks. Due to these rigorous, aggressive, preemptive evacuations, and the discipline of the local population in remaining indoors during the core hours of the storm, Mong Cái City recorded 0 human fatalities and 0 major injuries as of the official morning briefings on July 5, 2026. As the core of Typhoon No. 1 moved north-northeast into southern Guangxi, China during the morning of July 5th, wind speeds over Mong Cai gradually dropped below dangerous thresholds. The municipality immediately transitioned into an aggressive recovery and cleanup posture. Environmental sanitation crews, backed by military personnel wielding specialized heavy chainsaws and mechanical loaders, began cutting up and clearing the hundreds of downed trees blocking the urban grid. Initial efforts prioritized clearing routes to hospitals, medical centers, and the primary arterial highways leading to the border checkpoint to ensure that emergency transit remained unimpeded. Specialist repair crews from the Vietnam Electricity (EVN) branch in Quang Ninh were deployed across Mong Cai's affected wards. Workers began the arduous process of lifting downed lines, replacing shattered concrete crossarms, and isolating damaged transformers to gradually bring power back online section by section. Although the physical center of Typhoon No. 1 has officially exited Vietnamese territory and is rapidly losing structural cohesion over mainland China, secondary threats remain severe. The National Center for Hydro-Meteorological Forecasting has issued extended alerts for the entire northeast region. The trailing convective tail and massive moisture circulation of the weakening storm continued across the Gulf of Tonkin, feeding vast bands of rain clouds into northern Vietnam. Mong Cái City and the wider Quảng Ninh Province are projected to receive an additional 40 to 90 millimeters of rain, with localized areas experiencing intense cloudbursts exceeding 120 to 200 millimeters through the remainder of July 5th. Because the soil across Quang Ninh's mountainous border districts has reached complete water saturation from days of antecedent rain, its structural integrity is heavily compromised. The government has placed all highland communes on maximum alert for sudden landslides, earth sags, and destructive flash floods down steep river valleys and small streams.